He did not die quickly. In a crowded square lit by torches, a man knelt with iron pincers biting into his flesh. Each crack of bone echoed through the night, each scream drowned by the roar of a mob hungry for justice. The glowing tongs hissed against his skin as pieces of him were ripped away, leaving blood to slick the cobblestones. This was not just punishment. It was a performance, a warning to anyone who dared challenge the church. The man you just imagined could have been the assassin of Peter of Castelnau, a papal legate whose murder in 1208 ignited one of medieval Europe's most brutal crusades. Castelnau was appointed by Pope Innocent III to root out the Cathar heresy in southern France. While traveling near the Rhône, he was stabbed to death by an unknown squire. His assassination shocked Christendom and provided the Pope with a pretext for launching the Albigensian Crusade, which devastated the region and reshaped European history. As for the assassin, historical records suggest he vanished into obscurity. Yet to understand the terror his capture might have brought, we must explore the world that produced both the heretic and the executioner. The Languedoc of the early 13th century was a land of song and tolerance, but it was also a powder keg of religious dissent. The Cathars, who believed the material world was corrupt, had found refuge there. Their teachings threatened the authority of the Catholic Church, and Pope Innocent III responded by sending legates like Peter of Castelnau to preach orthodoxy. Castelnau's mission was fraught. He excommunicated powerful nobles and demanded obedience from Count Raymond VI of Toulouse. These confrontations fanned simmering resentment. According to a contemporary chronicle, Castelnau confronted Raymond in early 1208 and warned him that if he did not suppress the heresy, he would be held personally responsible. Days later, as the papal legate attempted to cross the Rhône, an evil-hearted squire in Raymond's retinue stabbed him and fled. The murderer's name is lost to history, but his knife changed the fate of nations. On a cold January morning, Castelnau's party prepared to cross the river. The legate, weary from months of travel, likely did not notice the figure following him. In an instant, steel flashed. The papal legate collapsed, mortally wounded, and the assassin disappeared into the crowd. Rumors swirled that Raymond VI had ordered the killing, though evidence for his direct involvement is lacking. Still, the murder was enough for Innocent III to excommunicate the count and call for a crusade. There was no trial for the anonymous squire. He vanished into the safety of his lord's territory. In later centuries, chroniclers would wonder what punishment he would have faced had he been caught. To imagine the punishment awaiting Castelnau's assassin, we must look to other executions in medieval Europe. When heretic leaders like Fra Dolcino were captured, they were paraded through towns and gradually torn to pieces by red-hot pincers. Witnesses recalled how, after watching his companion burned, Dolcino rode on a cart while executioners tore away his flesh with glowing iron. Centuries later, Robert-François d'Amiens, who attempted to kill Louis XV, endured a similar fate. His flesh was torn from his limbs with red-hot pincers before molten wax and lead were poured into his wounds and his body was dismembered. Such punishments were designed to prolong agony and display the power of the state. The condemned were not simply killed, they were unmade slowly, while crowds watched in horror and fascination. Imagine the assassin's capture. Bound in iron, he is hauled before a tribunal presided over by papal judges. His sentence is death by exemplary torture. He is stripped and tied to a wooden platform in the center of a square. A brazier glows nearby, heating iron pincers until they turn the color of blood. The executioner begins at the calf, squeezing and ripping away a strip of flesh. He moves methodically upward, tearing muscle from bone. The crowd's nausea is tempered by curiosity. This is what happens to those who spill sacred blood. Between each tear, the executioner pauses, letting the screams reverberate, then thrusts the pincers back into the coals. The smell of burnt skin mingles with incense. When the flesh of his arms and thighs has been flayed, his hand, the hand that held the knife, is burned with sulfur and oil, a ritual cleansing before destruction. Finally, the weakened man is tied to 4 horses. At a signal, the animals lunge in opposite directions, snapping sinew and pulling his limbs free. The dismembered torso, still shuddering, is thrown onto a pyre and consumed by flames. Such a scene mirrors those recorded in the punishments of Dulcino and Damiens. Whether or not Castelnau's assassin met this end, it is the fate he would likely have faced had he been captured. Castelnau's death unleashed a storm. In 1209, armies bearing the cross descended on Languedoc, massacring towns and burning heretics en masse. The Albigensian Crusade, justified as retribution for the legate's murder, lasted 2 decades and effectively eradicated the Cathar movement. Count Raymond VI, despite proclaiming innocence, was excommunicated and dispossessed. The Church gained new territories, and the French crown extended its control over the south. The anonymous squire's dagger became the spark that ignited a war of annihilation. In subsequent years, inquisitors hunted heretics with relentless zeal. Those accused of apostasy or treason were often subjected to elaborate punishments meant to terrorize onlookers. The execution methods inflicted on Dulcino and Damiens show how authorities weaponized pain and spectacle. Why did society accept such cruelty? Medieval justice equated punishment with divine vengeance. Pain was a measure of sin. Executions were theater, reminding the faithful that salvation lay in obedience. The fate of Castelnau's assassin, whether anonymous exile or imagined dismemberment, invites us to question how fear is used to enforce power. The Church condemned Cathar beliefs as dangerous heresy, yet its response unleashed violence far greater than the original crime. If one man's knife could justify a crusade, what does that say about the fragility of authority? When the glowing pincers tore flesh from bones, they served not only to punish, but to silence dissent. Would we have stood with the legate, the heretics, or the executioner? And what does our horror reveal about our own thirst for justice and vengeance? Thank you for joining this journey into one of history's darkest corners. The story of Peter of Castelnau's assassin shows how a single act of violence can reshape nations and how punishment can be wielded as a weapon. Share your thoughts below. Does the imagined fate of the assassin change how you see the crusade? If this tale chilled you, stay tuned for the next story of a man who was pounded alive under stones. Until then, reflect on the price of faith and power, and remember that history's horrors often mirror our own potential for cruelty.